Coming up, the Panthers failed to clinch while the Flames are officially eliminated from playoff contention. This is Locked On Game to Game NHL.
Every game, every team, every angle. Locked On Game to Game, your team every day.
Welcome in. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NHL. Local experts joining us to recap everything for you from last night in the NHL. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Panthers were unable to clinch their wild card spot after a 2-1 loss to Toronto last night. Locked On Panthers is in to go over the path for Florida going forward if they hope to make the postseason.
A missed opportunity for the Florida Panthers to clinch a playoff spot. What is up, guys? I'm Armando Velez from the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and the Florida Panthers lose to the Toronto Maple Leafs by a final score of 2-1 in overtime. And the Florida Panthers, this game was all about missed opportunities for them. They doubled the possession, almost doubled the amount of shots, but Ilya Samsonov came out big for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And even though the shots were doubled, as far as the high danger chances for Toronto, they had the more high danger chances on the night, and Alex Lyons stood tall once again. He earned third star of the week for the NHL earlier in the day, and he still stood tall for the Panthers once again. It's a 7-game point streak for the Panthers, so not all hope is gone as far as their playoff hopes, because this team is still in control of their destiny. So listen to my recap of this 2-1 overtime loss for the Florida Panthers against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Make sure to listen to my next episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Your team every day.
The Islanders failing to take advantage of Florida's loss. New York tried to mount a comeback in the third period against the Capitals last night, but Washington had a response for everything New York had. Locked On Islanders and Capitals recap the final.
The Islanders come up empty when it matters most. Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders here. The New York Islanders fall to the Washington Capitals in an embarrassing game, a must-win game for the Islanders. They controlled their own destiny, and it only took 63 seconds for this game to fall apart. It was 2-0, a minute and 3 seconds into this game. The Islanders just not ready to play. The desperation level wasn't there. The defense that this team needs to play to win hockey games wasn't there. And the offense didn't show up until maybe the last 4 or 5 minutes of the hockey game when it was already too late. Now the Islanders are going to need a lot of help to make the playoffs. And quite honestly, the way they played tonight, they haven't showed that they deserve it. And this has to fall squarely on the shoulders of Coach Lane Lambert. For more, listen to and watch the Locked On Islanders podcast with me, Gil Martin, wherever you get podcasts.
Washington Capitals take down the New York Islanders by a score of 5-2. This is Dan Holme of Locked On Capitals. Well, the Capitals got the goal scoring early. 63 seconds was all it took Monday for the Capitals to jump out to a multi-goal lead over the New York Islanders as they roll past them. Dylan Strome got the scoring started for the Caps. One shift later, the Capitals' second line scored right off the draw. Craig Smith found Rasmus Sandin along the glass. The Capitals were humming along this entire evening. According to NHL stats, Strome and Sandin combined for the 5th fastest 2 goals to start a game in franchise history, and the fastest since Ovechkin and Oshie did it in 46 to open a game against the Montreal Canadiens on October 7th, 2017. Darcy Kemper was also engaged as he stopped 38 of 40. This was a Capitals team that was up against it. They were missing all sorts of players. This was a Caps team that was out Alex Ovechkin, TJ Oshie, Anthony Manther, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, and Nick Dowd. I'll have more on this for you tomorrow on Locked On Capitals, your team every day.
Calgary officially eliminated from playoff contention after last night's loss to Nashville. Locked On Flames comes to grips with that. Locked On Predators holding on to their slim playoff chances.
They did it. The Nashville Predators defeated the Calgary Flames in a dramatic shootout win to keep their slim playoff chances alive another day. Hey everyone, Ann Kimmel from Locked On Predators. Igor Afanasiev scored his first ever NHL goal to help the Preds end regulation tied up 2-2. Overtime was scoreless, and then UC Saros made the stops he needed to, and Tommy Novak scored the game-winning goal in the shootout to keep the Predators Predators' slim playoff chances alive. This was not by any means a flawless performance by the Predators, who struggled again in the second period and couldn't convert on 6 power play opportunities. But with UC Saros in net, anything is possible. This performance by Saros is just another reason that the fun-sized Finnish goaltender must be a part of any Vezina nominee conversation. This young and pieced together Predators team does have plenty of pluck and unrefined talent, but it is UC Saros without a doubt who is Nashville's ace up the sleeve. The Preds are going to need the Jets to lose looking forward, and the Preds are going to need to really perform better in their final 2 games if they hope to still make the playoffs. But friends, this team and UC Saros are determined to keep it interesting as long as they can.
The Dallas Stars scored the first 6 goals of the game in Detroit and beat the Red Wings in the process yesterday. Our Locked On hosts with both teams go over Dallas's dominant performance.
The Dallas Stars handled the Detroit Red Wings 6-1 on a night that was highlighted by Joe Pavelski's 1,000th NHL point. Hey, everybody, this is Dane Lewis with the Locked On Stars podcast, and it was pure domination from the Stars from start to finish in the Motor City. They scored the first 6 goals of the game in an absolute offensive explosion. Jason Robertson with 3 points, Roope Hintz with 4 points, Miro Heiskanen with 2, and of course, the biggest storyline of the night, Joe Pavelski, Captain America, gets his 1,000th career NHL point, of course, coming in on a tip-in goal. Couldn't envision it any other way for number 16. That's been his bread and butter his entire career, and he uses it tonight, his 27th goal of the season, to help propel the Stars past the Red Wings in a game that was just all Stars from start to finish. Jake Ottinger and Scott Wedgwood both play in this game. Ottinger gets the start, saves 12 of 13, and then Pete DeBoer decides to pull him after the Stars were up 6-1. Scott Wedgwood comes in and saves 7 of 7. So both goalies looking good, and the entire team right now playing their best hockey, which is perfect given where the Stars are at with only 2 games remaining on their schedule and the playoffs just around the corner. The Stars doing everything they can to put themselves in a position to potentially win the Central Division and claim home ice advantage for at least their first round playoff series. But we're going to be talking about this game against the Red Wings in its entirety on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Stars. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast at, and I hope you can join us.
Yikes. I think that's about the best word that you can use to describe this one, as Red Wings go down in an ugly fashion for the second straight game, their 3rd straight loss in a row. This time, Scotty, at the hands of the Dallas Stars, losing by a final of 6-1. And I don't know about you, Scotty, but the season can't end soon enough now.
Yeah, that was brutal, and over the weekend, obviously, was a pretty rough loss to Pittsburgh as well. Just not very good hockey lately. Hopefully that, a couple games left, maybe try to end on a high note, but definitely a rough game tonight. Just horrible goaltending. I don't know. I was trying to find another word to describe it, and I'm not sure I found one. Pretty brutal goaltending in this one by whoever they put in net. And just the inability to put the puck in the back of the net offensively, which we've talked about a lot this year.
Yeah, and every single problem that the Red Wings have had all season presented itself in this game, and we'll talk about it on Tuesday's episode of Locked On Red Wings.
Coming up, the Jets keep winning, and they look to lock up that final West wildcard spot. This is Locked On Game to Game NHL. Today's edition of Locked On Game to Game is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. The Stanley Cup playoffs are just a couple of days away at this point, so it's the perfect time for you to download FanDuel. And new customers get that no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. So you just have to download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It is safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and goals in the game. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. Don't miss your chance to get that no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Welcome back. You're listening to Locked On Game to Game NHL. I'm your host, Kainani Stevens. Thank you again for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. The Sharks got a pair of goals from Erik Karlsson, but nothing else, and they ended up losing to Winnipeg. Locked On Jets goes over that wild card final push, and Locked On Sharks has more on the loss.
Against all odds, the Winnipeg Jets have now found themselves just 1 point out of a clinched playoff spot. After 2.5 months of doing something resembling hockey, the Jets have finally woken up at exactly the right time, beating the San Jose Sharks 6-2 to put themselves within touching distance of the last wild card berth in the Western Conference. Better yet, the Calgary Flames, they're eliminated thanks to the Nashville Predators winning in a shootout. Everything is coming up Winnipeg, and we'll dive into not only the game against the San Jose Sharks, but also Winnipeg's path forward for the playoffs on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. I am your host, Harrison Lee. I will see you there. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Locked On Jets on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening. See you then, and go Jets go.
Erik Karlsson becomes the 6th player in NHL history to score 100 points as a defenseman in a season. I'm JD Young of Locked On Sharks. The Sharks get trounced by the Jets 6-2, but Erik Karlsson's 2 goals put him at the century mark. He joins the likes of Paul Coffey, Dennis Potvin, Paul Coffey, Al McInnes, and Brian Leetch as the first defenseman since 91-92 to hit the century mark as a defenseman. Big accomplishment for Karlsson, especially on this terrible Sharks team. 25 goals, 75 assists as he's hit 100 with 2 games left. We'll have a full breakdown of what this means for Karlsson. We'll talk about Tristan Robbins' debut. So all that and more on your next episode of Locked On Sharks, wherever you get podcasts. And of course, you subscribe for free on YouTube as well.
The Wild continue to tune up before the postseason with a win over Chicago on Monday. Locked On Wild goes over what went down.
On a night in which many key contributors did not make the trip, Marcus Johansson called game and the Wild picked up a win. Hey everybody, Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, recapping a 4-2 win for the Minnesota Wild over the Chicago Blackhawks. No Kirill, no Zuccarello, no Spurgeon, no Brodin, no Joel Eriksson. No problem for the Wild, although this one did not start off on the best note. Sloppy play, and the Wild did have a 1-0 lead thanks to Matt Boldy, but then trailed 2-1 into the third before Marcus Johansson scored 2 goals and Gustav Nyquist with the empty netter to seal it. And so the Wilds pick up a win to stay near the top of the Central Division standings. For more on the Minnesota Wild, make sure you're following Locked On Wild wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Vancouver's looking forward to the close of their season, specifically after a 3-0 loss to the Kings last night. Locked On Canucks is in with more.
If it didn't feel like the Canucks season was nearing to an end, it certainly felt that way after tonight. I'm Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks. The Canucks lost 3-0 to the Los Angeles Kings in their third last game of the season, and it was just a brutally boring, disappointing effort. But honestly, it was a must-lose game because, the Canucks are climbing the standings of late. They're losing their chance at drafting either Bedard or Fantilli. It was a must-lose game tonight, especially with the Anaheim Ducks and the Arizona Coyotes on the docket to close out the schedule here. Probably the most entertaining thing from tonight's game, Sheldon Dries and Sean Dursey got in a crazy scrap in the second. That was followed by a scrap by JT Miller and Adrian Kempe. Aside from that, not many highlights from the Canucks perspective. Kyle and I got you on the next episode of Locked On Canucks, dropping tomorrow.
That's a wrap for this edition of Locked On Game to Game NHL. Thank you for making Locked On your first listen every weekday. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On NHL and your favorite team's Locked On podcast on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcasts from. I'm Kainani Stevens. This has been Locked On Game to Game.